5 years. It's astonishing how long that stretch of time can feel when every minute is spent chasing a future that never truly belonged to you. My name is Marcus Hale, and for what feels like an eternity, my world revolved around a single mission: to help my wife, Sienna, realize her dreams. It wasn't just words at the altar. It was a vow woven into every muscle ache, every sleepless night, every silent prayer uttered behind the wheel of my beat-up delivery van. My mornings started before the sun dared to peek over the horizon, stacking pallets in frigid warehouses where forklifts shrieked endlessly. Then, a hurried sandwich, usually stale, before launching into the evening shift, delivering packages. Amazon, pizza, you name it. I'd leave it with a tired smile that barely masked how close I was to shattering. Each time I'd stumble through the door at 3 a.m, Sienna would be waiting in our cramped apartment, curled on the sofa, her nursing textbooks fanned out around her like fallen leaves. She'd lift her eyes, the same weary resignation mirrored in their depths, and whisper, "Just a little longer, baby." I lived on those words. Pressed a kiss to her forehead, draped a blanket over her shoulders, and told myself that love was measured in sacrifice, not comfort. I watched her push herself, studying through migraines, pulling all-nighters before exams, battling the gnawing fear that she wasn't good enough. And God, I admired her for it. I didn't see the warning signs. Not really. I chalked up the distance between us to stress. The way her laughter no longer filled the room like it used to. The way her eyes would sometimes flick away when I said, "I love you." How she stopped asking about my day. I figured we were just tired, overworked, climbing this steep hill together. Every time she cried over a failed practice test or doubted her abilities, I held her tighter, worked even harder, determined to build a foundation strong enough for her to stand on. One night, I remember more vividly than the others. The night she got the acceptance letter to the nursing program. She screamed, throwing herself into my arms. Her joy was so blinding it made me forget the ache in my own bones. "We did it!" she cried. And in that moment, I believed it. We, not she. We were a team. Fool that I was. For years, every spare dollar I earned went into her education. Books that cost as much as our monthly rent, lab coats, practice supplies, gas for her commute to the hospital. Meanwhile, I wore shoes with holes in the soles, and a gourmet meal for me was a bacon cheeseburger from a greasy spoon. It didn't matter. I told myself it would all pay off in the end. That one day we'd look back on these struggles and laugh, holding each other in the better life we'd built, sweat and blood mingled together. That was the dream, wasn't it? To lift her up so we could rise together. What I didn't understand was too naive, too trusting, too damn in love to comprehend, was that in her mind, the finish line wasn't the start of our next chapter. It was the end of my usefulness. I was the training wheels she couldn't wait to discard once she learned to balance without me. All the whispered promises, all the midnight kisses on the forehead. It wasn't a covenant. It was a transaction with a hidden expiration date. And when it finally arrived, I wouldn't even be afforded the dignity of a warning. There's a cruelty to hope. It blinds you in the moments when the people you love most are quietly packing their bags, without telling you where they're going. You stand there, a foolish grin plastered on your face, offering your heart like a sacrifice, oblivious to the fact that their hands are already full of new dreams that no longer include you. 5 years of belief, 5 years of breaking my back to build a dream meant for only one of us. 5 years of "just a little longer, baby," echoing in my ears, a lullaby masking a slow goodbye. I carried that hope like a fool carries a winning lottery ticket he never bothered to check, thinking it would save me, change everything, when all along it was just paper, worthless once the numbers were called. How I wish I could say I saw it coming, that I noticed the hollowness in her embraces, or the way she'd flinch when I mentioned the future. But love blinds in the most insidious way. Not by covering your eyes, but by filling them with such a bright light that you fail to see the cracks forming in the foundation. I didn't see it. I didn't feel it until it hit me with the force of a sledgehammer to the chest. And by then, the truth was a chasm I couldn't bridge. Sienna Hale, the woman around whom I'd built my life, had already decided that the life we'd built together was a stepping stone she was ready to leave behind. And I was just the fool still standing at the bottom of the stairs, hand outstretched, waiting for a hand that would never reach back down. I didn't know what I was walking into that day. If I had, maybe I would have braced myself harder. Maybe I would have recognized the fragile tension in the air the moment I stepped through the door. But no. After all those years, some foolish part of me still believed in happy endings. On the drive home from my night shift, I stopped at the store. Exhaustion sat heavy on my bones, but a strange sort of anticipation bubbled beneath it. I picked out a cheap bouquet of roses and a card with big, goofy gold letters that read, "Proud of you." I was ready to celebrate her, us, everything we'd fought so hard for. But when I pushed open the door, the apartment was too quiet, too staged, almost like a set in a play where I was the only one who hadn't read the script. The champagne bottle caught my eye first, glinting in the sunlight like a snare. It sat in the center of the kitchen table, next to a neat stack of papers. And there she was, Sienna, radiant in her crisp white coat, the symbol of all those years of sacrifice finally realized. She looked like everything we'd ever dreamed of. For half a second, I smiled. Half a second before the floor dropped out from under me. She turned, and her face was alight with something that wasn't joy. It was freedom, a wild, untamed relief that had nothing to do with me. "You made it," she said lightly, reaching for the champagne and popping the cork with a casualness that twisted my gut. The foam spilled over and she giggled, pouring 2 glasses without even looking at me. I placed the flowers on the counter, feeling foolish. They looked pathetic there, bright and desperate, out of place in a room that no longer felt like mine. I reached for the papers, my fingers trembling slightly, my heart hammering a frantic warning I didn't yet dare to acknowledge. I didn't need to read the heading. I knew instantly. A prenuptial agreement, division of assets, no children, no shared anything beyond the beat-up truck and the mismatched furniture we'd bought secondhand when we were poor, stupid, and madly in love. I looked up at her, searching, silently begging for some explanation, for a flicker of the woman I'd given everything to. Instead, she offered a wider smile, clinking her glass against mine. "I need to grow without dead weight holding me back," she said in a tone as breezy as if she were discussing a new haircut. Dead weight. That's what I had become to her. An anchor she no longer wanted to drag along now that she had wings to fly. I didn't argue, not because I agreed, but because standing there like an idiot in my work boots and warehouse uniform, I understood that anything I said would only amplify the narrative she had already written. Love hadn't died here. It had been methodically buried, replaced by ambition, resentment, a hunger for a life that no longer had room for me. I sank heavily into a chair at the table, the wood groaning under the weight of the moment, and reached for the pen she had thoughtfully placed beside the papers. My hand hovered for a second, a single beat where I considered fighting, begging her to remember the nights we'd spent on a blow-up mattress because we couldn't afford a bed frame, the nights I'd come home with frostbitten fingers just to jump-start, her car so she could make it to her clinicals, all the invisible ways I had built a world around her. But what was the point? She had already decided I didn't belong in the life she was fighting for. And I signed. No hesitation, no dramatic pause for effect, just the swift, brutal scratch of the pen across the paper. Behind me, I heard a laugh, a soft, derisive chuckle that sent a shiver down my spine. I turned my head slightly and saw Rachel, Sienna's best friend, leaning against the kitchen doorway, a champagne flute in her hand. Her smirk barely concealed her satisfaction. She wasn't even trying to hide her triumph. That's when I understood this wasn't a private betrayal. This was a celebration, a liberation. They were both gleeful at the thought of a future unburdened by me. I pushed the signed papers toward Sienna and stood. The chair scraped loudly against the linoleum, a harsh, ugly sound that felt too fitting for the moment. She didn't say thank you, didn't say sorry, just picked up the papers, glanced at my signature, and nodded approvingly, as if I'd just completed the last routine task before being dismissed. I walked toward the door on legs that felt strangely detached from my body, numb and slow. I didn't look back. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing any flicker of emotion crack through the surface. No anger, no sadness, nothing. Let them laugh. Let them toast. Outside, the world was achingly normal. Birds chirped. A neighbor washed his car. Somewhere down the street, a lawnmower whirred. The sun was too bright, too indifferent to the devastation that had just occurred behind that door. I climbed into my old pickup, my hands gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles were white. For a long moment, I just sat there, staring straight ahead, trying to remember how to breathe without her. 5 years ago, I had vowed to build a life around her. I had spent every waking moment laying stone upon stone, brick upon brick, constructing a dream where she could stand tall. And today, with a few strokes of a pen and a bottle of champagne, she had leveled it all. Not with fury or malice, but with something colder, indifference. I shifted into drive and pulled away from the curb, the tires crunching on the gravel. I didn't cry, didn't rage. I just drove, mile after mile, away from the life I had built, away from the woman who no longer needed me. Somewhere deep inside, a small, broken voice whispered that maybe this wasn't the end. Maybe it was a beginning. But in that moment, it didn't feel like a beginning. In that moment, it felt like all that was left was ash. The night air clung to my skin like a second, colder layer as I loaded my life into the bed of my beat-up blue pickup truck. There wasn't much. Clothes, a few tools, an old coffee maker with a cracked handle, and a box of memories I couldn't yet bring myself to throw away. The very memories that pressed against my chest like chains. I moved quietly, methodically, as if a loud sound might give someone a chance to talk me out of leaving. But no one came out. No one stopped me. The apartment that had once been our sanctuary loomed behind me, its windows glowing warmly, a cruel joke. I hadn't expected Sienna to come out. Maybe some stubborn, wounded part of me had still hoped. That maybe she'd stand on the porch, arms crossed like she used to when we'd had a fight, taunting me to stay, daring me to care enough to argue. But the doorway remained empty. The only figure that emerged was her mother, Carla. She leaned against a porch column, a full wine glass swirling lazily in her hand. A smirk, hard as armor, was etched on her face as she watched me, like a cat observing a trapped mouse. I didn't give her the satisfaction of meeting her gaze, didn't flinch when she raised her glass in a mocking toast as I loaded the last of my belongings. Her contempt stung far less than Sienna's indifference. The engine of my truck coughed to life, a rough, defiant sound in the quiet night. I slammed the door shut, the echo bouncing off the neighboring houses, and for the first time in years, there was no one waiting inside to make sure I made it home safe. I was alone, utterly, undeniably alone. My knuckles ached as I gripped the steering wheel, and I dared to glance one last time in the rearview mirror. That's when I saw her. Sienna stood in the living room, visible through the sheer curtain. She wasn't crying. She wasn't even looking my way. She was laughing, tossing her graduation cap in the air like she had just won a game I didn't even know we were playing. The sight knocked the air out of me more than any physical blow. I swallowed the sharp ache in my throat, put the truck in reverse, and backed out of the driveway, not looking back again. No screech of tires, no dramatic pause for effect. Just a slow, deliberate drive, each mile widening the gulf between the man who had begged for scraps of love and the man I was going to become. My phone vibrated on the passenger seat, Jasper's name lighting up the screen. My brother, always loyal, always ready to charge into battle for me, even when I didn't ask. I let it ring, a message piling up in the voicemail. He'd called 3 times already today, his voice growing more frantic with each attempt. "Marcus, don't do this, man. She's just scared. She doesn't mean it. You guys can fix this." But you couldn't fix something that had been quietly breaking for years. With every dismissive glance, every forgotten promise, every whispered, "just a little longer," that had slowly eroded what we once were. No, I was done fighting for someone who had so clearly stopped fighting for me. Done bleeding for a love that had devolved into a transaction she could terminate when it no longer served her. I turned off the phone, shoving it deep into the glove compartment where its pleading buzz would become just a faint, distant memory. The further I drove, the lighter I felt, an unfamiliar, almost frightening sensation, like I had carried a boulder on my back for so long that standing straight felt wrong, unnatural. I had no plan, no job, no new place to sleep. I had a few thousand in the bank, a beat-up pickup, and the clothes on my back. That was it. But for the first time in a long time, I also had something Sienna could never take away from me again: my freedom. Somewhere over the horizon, there had to be a life built on more than just sacrifice. A life that didn't require me to shrink myself smaller and smaller to fit into someone else's dream. I drove until the familiar landmarks disappeared, until the city lights dissolved into a blanket of stars I hadn't seen in years, until the ache in my chest dulled to something manageable. I didn't know exactly where I was going. I just knew it had to be somewhere Sienna's memory couldn't reach. Somewhere I could just be Marcus, not Marcus the delivery guy, Marcus the night manager, Marcus the husband who wasn't enough. Just Marcus. As dawn painted the sky in soft hues, I pulled over on the shoulder of a quiet country road. Fields stretched endlessly on either side, mist clinging to the low hills like lazy ghosts. I turned off the engine and sat for a while, breathing in the silence, letting it fill the empty spaces Sienna had left behind. I opened the glove compartment and retrieved my phone again. One last check. No new messages, no desperate apologies, no sudden realization of regret. And somehow that made it easier. I deleted her number, the final severing of a thread I had clung to long after it had frayed beyond repair. Then I tossed the phone back into the glove compartment, the click of the latch echoing the closing of a door. I leaned back against the worn seat. I didn't cry. The tears had dried up somewhere between the sound of Rachel's laughter and the sight of Sienna's cap flying through the air. What was left wasn't sadness. It wasn't even anger. It was something colder, sharper, resolve. I was done being the one who stayed, done being the one who waited. From this moment on, every mile, every hour, every breath belonged to me. And as the sun slowly climbed above the empty fields, painting the sky in the soft golds and pinks of a new day, I realized something else. I wasn't lost. I was finally free. Ashwood Creek wasn't on any of the important maps. Blink while driving through, and you'd miss the cracked welcome sign and the 2 narrow streets that constituted its downtown, which was precisely why I chose it. I needed a place forgotten by ambition, a place that didn't demand explanations or apologies. The day my pickup coughed its way into Ashwood, sounding as weary as I felt, I knew I'd found what I was looking for. The view was unremarkable. Rows of aging brick buildings, a gas station with a single working pump, and a diner with a peeling sign that simply read, "Gus's." I parked in front of the diner, mostly because I didn't know where else to go. My stomach rumbled, empty after the long, restless night of driving. Inside, it smelled of strong coffee, frying bacon, and something vaguely sweet. Maybe hope. A few old-timers hunched over their breakfasts, their boots tapping a slow rhythm on the worn linoleum. The woman behind the counter gave me a once-over and nodded slightly, like she'd seen my kind before, the ones running from something they didn't want to talk about. I slid into a booth by the window, the vinyl seat stuck to my jeans, the morning sun slicing across the table. Before I could grab a menu, a gruff voice cut through the quiet. "Coffee." I looked up to see Gus himself, a stocky man with a shock of gray hair, hands like tree trunks, and a gaze that pinned me to my seat. I nodded silently. He poured without waiting for an answer, a dark liquid steaming between us. "You new in town?" he asked, setting the pot down with a clunk. "Passing through," I lied, though some part of me knew I wasn't going anywhere. Gus grunted, unimpressed. He slid a plate of bacon and eggs in front of me without asking what I wanted, then lumbered back towards the kitchen. I stared at the food, a lump forming unexpectedly in my throat. It had been a long time since someone had just given me something without expecting anything in return. The days bled into weeks after that first meal. I found work almost immediately. A guy named Vernon ran a construction crew that always needed strong backs willing to sweat under the sun. It was hard, brutal work, hauling cinder blocks, mixing cement by hand, hammering until my arms trembled. But it was honest. The blisters and the nightly ache in my muscles didn't bother me. The pain felt good, tangible, unlike the sharp, untouchable ache Sienna had left behind. Nights, when I'd peel off my work boots and the throbbing intensified, I found myself drawn back to Gus's diner. It wasn't fancy, just chipped mugs, a jukebox that only played half the songs right, and a counter that leaned slightly to one side, but it became a sort of sanctuary. Gus wasn't a talker, but he had a way of saying exactly what needed to be said with as few words as possible. Like the night he tossed me a ring of keys without preamble. "Studio upstairs," he'd said, jerking a thumb towards a narrow staircase by the kitchen. "Empty. Cheap rent, if you don't mind fixing a few things yourself." I didn't even hesitate. I needed a place. I needed a start. The studio was barely bigger than a closet, a single room with a lumpy mattress on the floor, a battered dresser, and a tiny bathroom with a leaky faucet. But it was mine. No ghosts in the walls. No memories seeping up through the floorboards, just 4 empty walls and the raw materials for a new life waiting to be shaped. Gus and I struck an unspoken deal. I helped out at the diner when I wasn't on a construction site, fixing leaky pipes, repairing broken chairs, cleaning grease traps no one else wanted to touch. In return, Gus paid me in cash and kept my coffee cup full. More than once he found me working late, my hands greasy, the low twang of country music drifting from the jukebox. "You ain't broken, son," he said one evening, sliding a beer across the counter and leaning against the worn Formica. "Just been undervalued, and that's a damn sight different." I stared at him, not sure whether to laugh or cry. I settled for a nod. Maybe he was right. Maybe being left behind wasn't the same as being worthless. Maybe the wrong people just hadn't known how to appreciate what they had. Slowly, painfully, I started to piece myself back together. Not with grand pronouncements or dramatic new beginnings, but with small, sure steps. I fixed the squeaky door hinge at the diner, got the old motorcycle I bought off a guy for $200 running again. I watched the sun rise over the endless fields of Ashwood Creek, breathing in air that didn't feel heavy with failure. I didn't tell anyone from my old life where I was. Not Jasper, not my parents, certainly not Sienna. It wasn't about punishing them or proving anything. It was about protecting the fragile thing growing inside me. The part that believed I could be more than the man left holding the empty promises of a life that was never meant to last. One night, after the diner closed and the stars dusted the sky in a thick blanket, I sat on the fire escape above my studio, my legs dangling over the edge. A cool breeze kissed my skin, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was running. I felt like I was standing still, whole, healing. Ashwood Creek didn't care who I used to be. It didn't demand explanations or penance. It just existed, quiet, steady, real. And maybe, just maybe, that was all I needed right now. A place to exist without pretense. A place where I could finally remember who Marcus Hale was before love and loss had turned him into someone he barely recognized. The road behind me was closed. The road ahead was uncertain. But for the first time in a long time, the road belonged to me. The feeling of belonging didn't arrive overnight. It was more like a sunrise, slow creeping over the horizon. Gradual at first, almost imperceptible, but undeniable once it warmed your skin. Ashwood Creek, with its peeling paint and faded storefronts, became the backdrop to a life I was quietly, stubbornly building. I wasn't Marcus Hale, the discarded husband, anymore. I was just Marcus, and for the first time that felt like freedom. I bought a place just outside of town, a dilapidated old farmhouse with a collapsing porch and ivy climbing the walls like nature was slowly reclaiming it. The roof leaked when it rained. The front steps were rotted through. Most people would have laughed and kept driving, but when I stood there, keys in hand, I saw potential. It was mine. It didn't have to be perfect. It just had to be mine. I spent every spare hour fixing it up, replacing floorboards, patching leaks, hauling scrap lumber from construction sites. Every nail I hammered felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. The locals started to notice me, not in the intrusive way of the city, but in the small-town way where a nod at the grocery store meant acceptance. Gus introduced me to a few of the guys at the VFW hall, and soon I was helping them with their weekend projects, fixing fences, building wheelchair ramps, hauling firewood before the first snow. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't the life Sienna and I had once dreamed of over late-night takeout, but it was real, solid beneath my boots. Honest in a way that left no room for the kind of betrayal I had left behind. And then there was Delilah. I met her on a Tuesday afternoon, the kind of humid day where the air sticks to your skin and the clouds hang low, too tired to rain. I was patching the porch railing at the diner when a silver SUV kicked up gravel pulling into the parking lot. A woman unfolded herself from the driver's seat, a camera slung around her neck, her hair pulled back in a messy bun, wearing worn boots and a denim jacket that looked like it had seen 100 road trips. She looked around with a wide-eyed curiosity, like she was cataloging the details of the world around her. Our eyes met, and she offered a smile, simple and open, that hit me harder than I expected. I nodded, wiping sweat from my forehead with the back of my hand. She walked over without hesitation. "You're not from around here," she said. Her voice was light, teasing, not accusatory, just a statement of fact. I shrugged. "Guess that makes two of us." She laughed, the sound low and genuine. It wasn't a flirtatious giggle, not the practiced kind Sienna used as a weapon. It was easy, honest. She introduced herself. Delilah Moore, a traveling photographer documenting small towns across America. I didn't have much of a story to tell, and she didn't pry. She just sat on the porch steps while I worked, snapping photos of the diner sign, the chipped coffee mug in the window, the way the afternoon sun turned the dust motes to gold. Over the next few weeks, she kept showing up. Sometimes she'd order a slice of pie and nurse a cup of coffee for hours, flipping through her contact sheets. Sometimes she'd sit at the counter, chatting with Gus, making the old man laugh in a way I hadn't seen before. And sometimes she'd just find me wherever I was, fixing a fence, tuning an engine, and ask if she could take my picture. At first, I refused. I didn't want to be captured, frozen in time as the broken man who had run away. But Delilah had a way of looking at you that made you feel seen, not judged, not pitied, just seen. One day, I relented. She took a few shots of me sanding down the frame of the motorcycle behind the diner. I expected to hate them, expected to see the ghost of who I used to be. But when she showed them to me, I didn't see a broken man. I saw someone who was still standing, still fighting. Delilah didn't ask about my past. She didn't push. She just let me exist beside her, quiet and steady, until it felt natural to open up. One night, sitting on the tailgate of my truck, under a sky so full of stars it felt like it could swallow us whole, I found myself telling her things I hadn't spoken aloud in years. About the 5 years of tomorrows I had given to someone who never planned to stay. About the nights spent wondering what I could have done differently. About the quiet rage that still sometimes simmered in my gut, when I remembered Sienna's laughter as I drove away. Delilah listened. She didn't interrupt, didn't offer platitudes. When I finally ran out of words, she reached out and took my hand in hers. Simple, sure, comforting. "You deserve to be loved where you're valued," she said softly, "not tolerated." The words hit something raw and deep inside me. I hadn't realized how much I needed to hear them until that moment, how twisted I had become over the years, trying to make myself small enough, patient enough, good enough for someone who had already decided I wasn't what she wanted. With Delilah, there were no hoops to jump through, no invisible tests to pass. I could just be myself. For the first time in a decade, I believed that might be enough. That maybe I wasn't too broken. That maybe being left behind wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning of a new chapter, one where I got to drive on my own terms, with my own hands, on the porch of a crumbling farmhouse I would build back strong. And this time, I wouldn't be chasing someone else's dreams. This time, I would be living my own. Back in the city, the life Sienna had so meticulously tried to build, thread by thread, was beginning to unravel while I was learning to breathe again. Of course, I didn't know it then. I had stopped checking, stopped wondering. In my mind, she had everything she had ever wanted. The degree, the freedom, a fresh start without me dragging her down. I pictured her thriving, that dazzling smile she reserved for talk of her future plastered across her face. I assumed she had erased me like a teacher wipes a blackboard, quickly, efficiently. No trace of what had been written before. I was wrong. Sienna's world wasn't the glossy fairy tale she had envisioned. The new life she had so precisely plotted was quickly developing cracks. Rachel, her so-called best friend, the one who had toasted my departure with champagne, turned out to be less of a support system and more of a wrecking ball. Late-night parties, pulling Sienna into situations that made her uncomfortable. Nights that started with laughter and ended with shame. Mornings spent scrubbing away regrets with coffee and dark glasses, and 1,000 whispered lies about it just being a phase, just a little fun before real life began. Then there was Carla, her mother, whose constant hovering and judgment only amplified every small misstep Sienna tried to hide. Carla didn't see a daughter finding her independence. She saw an extension of herself, a trophy to be displayed at brunches and charity events. Every missed job application, every failed relationship became another lecture, another reminder that Sienna wasn't living up to the image her mother had crafted for her. The applause Sienna had so desperately craved began to sound hollow when it came with conditions and criticism veiled in praise. Even the job she finally landed wasn't what she had imagined. Nursing, once her passion, had devolved into 12-hour shifts with ungrateful patients, condescending doctors, and endless paperwork. The scrubs weren't glamorous. The pay wasn't life-changing. The reality didn't match the fantasy she had sacrificed so much for. She watched other nurses smile as they left their shifts and realized she couldn't remember the last time she had felt true joy. The kind that bubbled up from somewhere deep and clean. Her days blurred into a cycle of exhaustion and resentment, and the pride she had worn on graduation day had faded under the weight of routine and loneliness. Loneliness. That was the worst of it. The men she dated were a carousel of the same smiling faces, the same empty promises. None of them lingered long. None of them truly saw her. Not the way I had, back when she was just a girl who cried over bad grades and dreamed of saving lives. She had traded gold for glitter. And when the glitter had blown away on the wind, she was left standing in the ashes, wondering when everything had gone wrong. One night, rummaging through a box she hadn't touched in years, she found an old photograph. It was us, standing in front of our first apartment on the day we signed the lease, grinning like idiots, holding the ring of keys between us like it was Excalibur. My arm was slung around her shoulders, and she was laughing, a real, unguarded laugh that crinkled her nose and made her eyes sparkle. The sight hit her like a freight train. For the first time in a long time, she sat down and really looked at it. Not just the surface, but the layers beneath. She remembered the man who had worked 3 jobs so she could study. The man who kissed her fingertips before every exam and waited outside the hospital after her clinicals with a thermos of hot chocolate. The man who believed in her when she didn't believe in herself. And slowly, terrifyingly, she understood that she had thrown it all away. Not for a better life, not for happiness, but for an illusion. She had mistaken ambition for fulfillment, freedom for joy. And in the process, she had betrayed the only person who had ever truly stood by her, asking for nothing in return. That night, surrounded by empty wine glasses and unopened mail, she cried harder than she had ever cried before. Not for the life she thought she had lost, but for the man she had left standing at the door with a heart full of loyalty and a bouquet of wilting roses. For the first time, she wasn't angry at me. She didn't feel resentment. She felt shame. But shame is a strange beast. It doesn't offer a clear path to redemption. It gnaws. It erodes your sleep, your smile, your reflection in the mirror. It makes you do desperate things, like pick up your phone and scroll through old numbers, praying you hadn't deleted the one person you swore you'd never need again. Too late, Sienna understood that a love like mine didn't come around twice, that sometimes, when you burn a bridge, you lose not only the way back, but the right to even look across the river. Meanwhile, in Ashwood Creek, I lived my quiet life, oblivious to the storm gathering on the horizon. I no longer spent my nights mourning what I had lost. I no longer chased ghosts. I was building something real with my own 2 hands, my own heart. I was learning that sometimes survival isn't about holding on. It's about letting go. And in letting go, I was finding the pieces of myself I thought had been buried forever. I wasn't the same man who had stumbled out of that apartment with his world in boxes. I was someone new, someone stronger, someone Sienna wouldn't have recognized even if she had tried. And soon enough, she did try. It started as a ripple, not a wave. A few missed calls, a handful of emails from addresses I didn't recognize. At first, I ignored them. Ashwood Creek wasn't a place that drew strangers, and I was careful about who I gave my number to. The messages weren't direct. No names, no explanations, just a series of vague attempts to reach me. I dismissed them all. I had learned the hard way that sometimes silence is the only protection you need. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known then, was that a search had begun. Somewhere in that polished apartment, in that city, Sienna had realized that I wasn't simply waiting for her to come back. I wasn't sitting by the window, pining for the woman who had used me as a stepping stone. I was gone, truly gone, and that rattled her more than she expected. The first person she tried to reach was Jasper. My brother was always easier to find than I was, and if anyone knew where I'd vanished to, it would be him. But Sienna was years too late. Jasper had moved to California, chasing his own dreams, far from the wreckage I had left behind. When she called, he didn't answer. When she texted, he replied with 2 words, "Not my problem." It quickly became clear to her that the usual avenues for finding people, mutual friends, old neighbors, were dead ends. Most of the people who had once known me had either moved on or hadn't heard from me in years. I had made sure of that. When I left, I hadn't just packed my belongings. I had packed up my entire existence. No breadcrumbs, no forwarding address. I didn't want to be found. Not by her, not by anyone. That's when the desperation must have set in, turning into a frantic, blind scramble. She turned to social media, scrolling through Facebook groups, LinkedIn profiles, any digital footprint she could find. It wasn't long before she stumbled upon the diner's page. Gus's Diner. The old name still lingered in the metadata. Only it wasn't Gus's Diner anymore. It was Second Chance Cafe. New name, new owners, a new life. She sent a message to the page, hoping whoever ran it could lead her to me. She probably pictured me still washing dishes in the back, still stuck in the same small circle of existence she had discarded. But the page was now run by Gus's niece, and she didn't recognize Sienna's name. Didn't know my story. She ignored the message. Another dead end. Frustrated, Sienna got in her car and drove to my parents' old neighborhood. The house she had once visited for Sunday dinners was gone. Sold to a family with 3 kids and a dog that barked at her when she knocked. Strangers opened the door, offering polite but weary smiles before shaking their heads. No Marcus Hale here. No one by that name. No one who would care. That's when the panic bloomed full force, tightening its grip around her throat like a vice. It's funny how you can walk away from someone thinking you've won, only to realize later that you've lost everything that mattered. She had thought she had forever, that if she ever wanted, she could just turn around and I'd be there, waiting, like some loyal, broken thing too stupid to realize it deserved better. But the man she had left behind was no longer waiting. He was living. In Ashwood Creek, I had no idea of the chaos unfolding miles away. I was too busy sanding down the frame of an old Harley, my hands slick with oil, the air thick with the smell of gasoline and sun-baked metal. Life here was simple, honest. If I wasn't in the garage, I was at the diner or tinkering with the farmhouse, slowly coaxing it from a dilapidated ruin into a place that felt like home. Delilah's laughter often punctuated my days. A quiet, easy sound that warmed the places inside me I thought had frozen over for good. She never pushed when I seemed lost in thought, never tried to fix what wasn't broken. She just stood beside me, silent and steady, while I learned to be a man who wasn't defined by a lost love. If Sienna's search had a soundtrack, it would be the frantic tap-tap-tap of laptop keys, the shrill, unanswered ring of phones, the hollow click of sent and ignored messages. The harder she looked, the more she understood how completely I had slipped through her fingers, and with each dead end, the truth became harder to ignore. She hadn't just lost me. She had lost the version of herself that had mattered. The man she had discarded was no longer broken. He wasn't limping in her shadow. He wasn't begging to be seen. He had vanished into a life that was better, quieter, stronger than the one she had traded him for. When her desperation finally tipped over into full-blown panic, she did what all desperate people do. She tried harder, grasping at any thread that might lead her back to what she hadn't valued until it was too late. Old acquaintances, old numbers, even random encounters in the city. She cast a wide net, hoping for a miracle. But miracles are for believers. And Sienna had abandoned her faith the moment she signed those papers over a champagne toast. And somewhere deep down, she must have started to understand the most terrifying truth of all. Sometimes when you burn a bridge, it doesn't just collapse behind you. Sometimes it collapses beneath your own feet. Meanwhile, I lived each day without her ghost haunting my steps, without her laughter echoing in my dreams, without the weight of wondering when she would realize what she had lost. I didn't know the storm was coming. I didn't know how close it already was. But even if I had, I wouldn't have flinched, because when you build a life from ashes, you stop being afraid of the fire. The first thing I noticed that Thursday afternoon was the rain. It came down hard and fast, drumming against the roof of the Second Chance Cafe in a steady, relentless rhythm. I had just finished a long shift at the garage. My hands were still greasy. The ache of honest work settled deep in my bones. I didn't check my phone right away, just shrugged off my damp jacket, ran a hand through my hair to shake off the rain, and ordered a coffee at the counter from Marlene, Gus's niece, who offered me the same easy smile she always did. It wasn't until I settled into my usual corner booth by the window overlooking Main Street that I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. The screen lit up like a flashing red alarm. 169 missed calls. I stared at it, the numbers not registering at first. I scrolled through the call log. Every single one was from the same unknown number. Rapid fire, sometimes just minutes apart. Whoever it was, they weren't giving up easily. Curiosity won out over instinct. I swiped the screen and called back. It didn't even ring once before it connected. Marcus? The voice on the other end was raw, shaky, almost unrecognizable, but I knew it. Some things, no matter how hard you try to forget, etch themselves into your bones. It was Sienna. For a second, I said nothing, just sat there, the rain pounding against the window, the hum of the diner around me fading into a low, distant murmur. She was sobbing, ugly and loud, the way you cry when you don't care who hears. Words tumbled out of her, tripping over each other in their haste. I made a mistake, Marcus. God, I made the biggest mistake of my life. I was stupid. I thought I knew what I wanted. Her voice shook so violently, I thought she might shatter right there over the phone line. I need you, please. I'll do anything. I can fix this. I can fix us. I leaned back against the booth, a strange detachment settling over me, like I was listening to a story about someone else's life. The desperation in her voice might have once undone me. Months ago, maybe even weeks ago, I would have clung to every word, foolishly hoping that love could erase betrayal. But not now. Now I heard the truth beneath the pleas, the panic of someone who had realized too late that not all doors stay open forever. I didn't rush to answer. I let her fill the silence with more frantic words. Apologies, promises, memories. She was trying to piece them together into something that resembled redemption. I listened. I owed her that much. Or maybe I didn't owe her anything at all. When I finally spoke, my voice was calm even. No anger, no hatred. Just the quiet certainty that comes when you finally understand your own worth. I'm not the man you left anymore. The words hung between us like a blade. I didn't elaborate. I didn't try to soften the blow. I didn't offer her a map back to me. Some journeys aren't meant to be retraced. There was a long, drawn-out silence on the other end. I pictured her sitting wherever she was hiding, in that apartment or that car, the walls closing in, the realization dawning that she couldn't just rewind time and erase the hurt she had caused. And before she could gather herself to say whatever came next, I hung up. It wasn't anger that made me do it. It was mercy. For her, for me, for the boy I used to be, who would have clung to the fantasy that love could conquer all if you just wanted it badly enough. That boy deserved peace, and the man I was now was finally strong enough to give it to him. I placed the phone face down on the table and wrapped my hands around the warm mug of coffee Marlene had set in front of me. The heat seeped into my palms, grounding me in the present. Around me, life went on. Gus was good-naturedly arguing with a customer about the weather. Someone dropped a spoon and muttered a curse under their breath. The jukebox in the corner crackled to life, an old country song about loss and finding yourself filling the air. The rain blurred the world outside into a gray and silver wash. But inside, I felt a clarity I hadn't known in years. Delilah slid silently into the booth across from me, her damp hair curling around her face, a flicker of concern in her eyes. She must have seen something in my expression because she didn't ask what was wrong. She didn't need to. She just reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Her touch was solid and steady. I squeezed back. A small, silent thank you for her understanding. Sienna's voice echoed faintly in my memory, but it didn't carry the same sting it once had. It didn't break me or pull me under. It was just another sound, another closed door behind me. She had made her choice, and finally, so had I. Outside, the rain began to ease, the heavy drops softening into a gentle mist. The world beyond Ashwood Creek continued to spin, full of regrets and what-ifs, and people chasing after the past like ghosts they could never catch. But I wasn't chasing anything anymore. I was already home. 2 days later, the storm didn't come from the sky. It walked right through the door of the Second Chance Cafe. It was a Saturday morning, the kind that usually hummed with slow conversations and smelled of fresh-baked cinnamon rolls hanging in the air. I was behind the counter with Gus, wiping down mugs and talking about the upcoming county fair, when the bell above the door jingled sharply, announcing something more than just a customer. I didn't need to turn around to feel the shift in the room. Conversations died. Forks froze halfway to mouths. Even the jukebox seemed to stutter and fall silent. I knew before I looked who it was. Sienna stood in the doorway, soaked to the bone, her mascara streaking dark trails down her cheeks, her hair plastered wetly to her face. She wore a jacket too thin for the weather, her hands trembling as she clutched a sodden purse to her chest like it could hold her together. She looked nothing like the woman who had stood in our kitchen 5 years ago, radiant and triumphant, popping champagne over my broken heart. Delilah sat at the counter, a few stools down from me, a mug of tea clutched in her hands. She turned her head slightly, registering the scene without panic. Her expression was calm, but watchful. She didn't speak. She didn't move. She just observed, her presence a quiet wall of strength beside me. Sienna's eyes locked onto mine, and for a moment, the whole world narrowed to the space between us. She took a tentative step forward, her voice cracking through the thick, stunned silence of the diner. "Marcus, please." She dropped to her knees on the checkered linoleum with a soft thud that echoed far louder than it should have. A ripple of whispers went through the cafe. Forks clattered onto plates. Someone swore softly under their breath. She crawled towards me, reaching out a hand to grip the one I had resting on the counter, her fingers cold and trembling. Tears mingled with the rain on her face, making her look desperately childlike. "I'm sorry," she sobbed, her voice raw. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know what I was doing. I was stupid. I was selfish." She gasped for breath, a ragged sound. "I thought I needed to find myself, but I just lost everything that mattered." The diner was dead silent. Everyone held their breath, waiting for me to do something. Gus leaned against the doorframe to the kitchen, arms crossed over his chest, a wry twist to his lips that said he had seen 100 tragedies play out before, and this one wouldn't break the world. I knelt down beside her, not because I wanted to comfort her, but because I needed her to hear me, to see me without the barrier of distance or years. I looked into her eyes, the same eyes I had once known by heart, the same ones I had once vowed to protect, and I saw nothing there but the wreckage of choices she couldn't unmake. I spoke quietly, just loud enough for her to hear over the low hum of stunned patrons. "You taught me how to be invisible," I said, my voice low and steady. "You taught me that loyalty, sacrifice, love don't matter if they're inconvenient for you." She shook her head frantically, mouthing no over and over, but I continued. I needed her to understand that this wasn't anger talking. This was clarity. "You made me a ghost," I said. "Now you know what it feels like." I stood slowly, feeling the weight of every gaze in the room on my back. I felt Delilah's steady gaze, an anchor holding me to the ground. Sienna remained on her knees, looking up at me with a shattered expression, her hand still outstretched, a last desperate grasp. But I had no more lifelines to offer her. Without breaking eye contact, I walked over to Delilah. She set down her mug and rose to meet me without hesitation. I took her hand, the same hand that had held mine through the days of healing and the long, quiet nights. The hand that had never asked for anything but given everything freely. I raised her hand to my lips and kissed it gently, reverently, for everyone to see, for Sienna to see. The message was clear. This was my life now. This was where my loyalty, my love belonged. Delilah smiled softly, squeezing my hand in return, not to mark territory or claim victory, but simply to remind me that I wasn't alone anymore, that I didn't have to carry the old wounds like medals. Sienna let out a small, broken sob that seemed to shatter against the diner walls. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. As I led Delilah towards the door, the rest of the diner slowly came back to life, forks scraping against plates, conversations resuming awkwardly. Life refused to stay frozen for one woman's regret. Gus tipped his imaginary hat at me. A silent salute I understood without words. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving behind a soft, almost forgiving mist. I helped Delilah into my truck, climbed in beside her. For a moment, we sat in silence, the windows fogging slightly with our breath. Delilah rested her head on my shoulder. "You okay?" she whispered. I thought about it, really thought about it. About the years spent loving someone who couldn't love me back. About the nights spent wondering if I would ever feel whole again. About the long, brutal climb out of the hole Sienna had left me in. I turned my head and kissed Delilah's temple. "I'm better than okay," I said. "I'm free." As I started the engine and pulled away from the diner, away from the wreckage of a life that no longer belonged to me, I realized something else, something that made me smile. Some ghosts aren't meant to haunt you forever. Some ghosts are meant to teach you how to live again. Life didn't snap back like a rubber band after that day. It didn't magically erase the years I had spent trying to make myself small enough for someone else's dreams. Healing in Ashwood Creek wasn't a straight road. It was winding, full of small detours and unexpected stops. But it was mine. Every scar, every crack in my heart, every sharp edge I had once tried to smooth down for someone else's comfort, none of it needed to be hidden anymore. Delilah and I built a life together the way a craftsman builds a house. Slowly, without cutting corners, with careful hands and a patience neither of us had truly been afforded before. She didn't complete me. She didn't fill some missing piece. She walked beside me, and that was enough. We were two whole people choosing each other day after day, needing nothing but the space to simply be. On our wedding day, there was no fancy venue, no extravagant ceremony. We stood beneath the sprawling oak tree behind the cafe, the same one that had shaded so many quiet conversations and weary mornings. Gus officiated, a worn Bible in one hand and a mischievous glint in his eye, half reading, half improvising. The whole town showed up. Marlene from the diner, Vernon and his construction crew, even the mayor, who offered a slightly flustered but heartfelt blessing between bites of barbecue. Delilah wore a simple white cotton dress that billowed around her legs in the breeze. I wore the only suit I owned, the one Gus had insisted on ironing the night before. There were no bridesmaids, no groomsmen, no elaborate floral arrangements. Just us, standing beneath that tree, promising each other not perfection, not a fairy tale, but a love that grew from real soil, with roots strong enough to weather any storm. When she said, "I do," it wasn't a performance. It wasn't a script rehearsed 100 times. It was a vow spoken with a quiet certainty that made my chest ache with something sweet. When I slid the ring onto her finger, my hands didn't tremble. They were steady. Sure. I knew what I was giving, and I knew what I was receiving. Not a dream, not a lie, but a life. Afterward, we danced barefoot on the grass to old records played on a temperamental portable player that skipped every third song. Kids ran between tables laden with fried chicken, pies, and mason jars of sweet tea. It wasn't the wedding I might have imagined in my youth. Grand, polished, and perfect. It was better. It was ours. That summer, I opened a motorcycle repair shop in a small brick building a few blocks from the cafe. It smelled of oil and metal and possibility. I spent my days coaxing engines back to life and mentoring some of the younger guys in town who needed someone to believe in them, the way Gus had believed in me. Kids with too much anger in their fists and not enough direction in their lives. I taught them how to use a wrench, how to respect a machine, how to take pride in what they built with their own two hands. In the quiet hours between work, I'd sit on the steps of the shop, sipping coffee, listening to the rhythm of the town breathing around me. I didn't need the noise anymore. I didn't need the constant motion. I had found the beauty in the still life, the simple life, a life lived fully in the moments most people rushed right past. Every now and then, Sienna's number would flicker across my phone screen. No name, just the digits, burned into my memory like a brand. I never answered, but I never blocked it either. I didn't need to. Her calls weren't a threat. They were just fading echoes of a life I had already buried with my own 2 hands. Sometimes when the sun dipped low and painted the sky in bruised golds and deep blues, I would think of her, of the boy I had been, of the man I had become. I didn't hate her anymore. I didn't pity her either. I just understood something she never could. Some goodbyes are meant to last forever. Not out of anger, not out of revenge, but because letting go is an act of love too. Love for yourself. Love for the life that's still waiting on the other side of the ashes. Delilah would come and sit beside me on the steps, her camera slung over her shoulder, smelling faintly of wildflowers. She'd rest her head on my shoulder and ask, without words, if I was okay. And I always was more than okay. I was free. I was home. I was finally the man I was always meant to be. Beneath the open sky of Ashwood Creek, with calloused hands and a heart stitched back together day by day, I had built something that no one could ever take away from me again. A life, a love, a forever that belonged only to me.